Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining. Of course, technical difficulties always seem to crop up in this virtual world that we're in. But I wanted to welcome everyone. It's so good to have you all here, and we're honored to have both Dr. Aviva Romm and Nancy Peplinsky here to talk about motherhood and the unique journey that I'm sure we all know that it is. I'm Andrea Summers. I'm the executive director here at HMN. And for those of you that don't know, HMN is a national nonprofit organization, and our purpose is to bring natural and holistic-minded families together by building local intentional community chapters across the country that gather in person and are led by our volunteer community organizers. We also connect online and work to provide educational resources, share inspiring stories, and bring you the voices of the holistic community like we're doing here today. I wanted to take a moment to introduce both Nancy and Dr. Aviva. Nancy Peplinsky founded the Holistic Moms Network over 18 years ago. Back in 2003, we celebrated 18 last October. As a new mom, she found that the journey of motherhood was filled with so much learning and joy, but also loneliness, which drove her to create the Holistic Moms Network. She spent much of her life in nonprofit organizations, service, and educational environments. And during and after the completion of her graduate education, 2 MAs and 1 PhD, she's focused her energy on gender issues and empowering women. And Dr. Aviva Romm is a midwife, herbalist, and a Yale-trained MD and board certified family physician with specialties in integrative gynecology, obstetrics, and pediatrics. She's also the mother of 4 grown children who were born at home, and she wore her babies, breastfed, homeschooled, gardened, and all those things that many of us do or strive to do. She's also the author of 7 books, including Natural Health After Birth, Botanical Medicine for Women's Health, The Adrenal Thyroid Revolution, and her latest book is called Hormone Intelligence. So with that, I want to welcome you both and start that conversation about the beautiful, complicated journey that is motherhood and how we can best care for ourselves as mothers on that journey. So throughout the whole month of May, we've been celebrating motherhood and all that comes with it. So not just the, rainbows and butterflies, but all the things that come with our motherhood journey. And we'd love to hear your perspectives on some of those important pieces that sometimes get left behind or pushed to the side with the many layers of responsibilities and emotions and things that come up throughout the ever-changing journey of motherhood. So without further ado, we welcome you guys and please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. And it's wonderful to be here with this community.
Thank you as well. And it's really a pleasure to have you, Aviva. We were chatting a little bit before we got started. Aviva's early books were definitely fundamental for where I was going in my parenting journey when I first got started 21 years ago. And it was a interesting time. I think that, for those of us who can try anything holistic and sort of follow that path, I think one of the first things we confront is a sense of not belonging. And for me, it was really very powerful because I also had my first child at home. I had both my kids at home, but I had one at home and with the midwife. And I really went out into the world thinking, it would be fine and I would meet moms just like me. And I went to breastfeeding support groups and new moms groups. And it was really somewhat alienating because, if I said my son was born at home, people gave me sideways looks and thought, oh, okay. And that's really how Holistic Moms is born, because I think that more than anything, moms need support. You need a sense of community, a sense of support, on a place where you can feel safe to share the journey that you're on, because we all have challenges and it's so important that we find connection. And I know that that's a big part for you. And
It is, and what you were saying, Nancy, for me, back it up even 16 more years. So my oldest is 37. So even saying that I had a home birth back then or that I had a midwife, people are like, wait, people still do that? Or you had a what? And I was fortunate enough to find, and I think partly because I was becoming a midwife myself, I was deep in the bosom of some really wonderful traditional midwives, and that brought me into close connection with a lot of mamas who were trying to do what we were doing. So I didn't feel completely alienated, but what I found is, particularly as my kids got past what was a respectable breastfeeding age and I was still breastfeeding, I found myself kind of getting it from both sides, right? Like the other holistic moms I knew would literally, like, I'd be breastfeeding and like, don't you want to feed him? Or, don't you think that's enough? Or like all the things that were said to me that made me feel very judged and very alone and confused, because 37 years ago, it wasn't like you could just get answers online either. We kind of were sink or swim figuring it out. So I had to do a lot of trusting my gut. And on the other hand, I was getting it from family members who were, just mortified that I was breastfeeding an older child. Can't you just go do that in the bedroom, or do you have to do that? And so I didn't so much feel alone in the sense that I was very committed and kind of a bit of a warrior about what I was doing. But I felt a lot of um, kind of angst. Am I doing it wrong? Should I be weaning? Should I not be doing family bed? So I felt like I had this constant background chatter, not what I would call anxiety, but a low level of self-questioning that was definitely uncomfortable, like a very light kind of underlying anxiety. And I'm not an anxious person. It was just all this constant questioning and then lack of information. And of course, we want to do the best things for our babies. So it was very confusing, which I think has led me to a lot of the work I do now. And as a midwife, I've always been incredibly non-judgmental about how people choose to birth, where people choose to birth, how people choose to feed their babies or raise their babies or sleep with all the things. I would say the other thing for me is that I grew up in an environment. My mom was a single mom. She worked 2 jobs. It was just, go out and play after school. There was an element of benign neglect that I say, with all respect. In a sense, it made us very independent. I so wanted to be this attachment parent before attachment parenting was a concept, right? Before it was called that. So, I read the continuum concept, and I read this and I read that. And I breastfed my baby. I breastfed straight for 11 years, including 3 tandem nursings. I slept with my kids. And I think that I took too much responsibility on myself for shaping the outcome of my children. And it led me to feel a lot of times, I think, a lot of pressure to always get it right and do it right, as opposed to sometimes just saying, we need a date night. Let's just get a babysitter. It's okay to leave the kids. Or, yeah, we're not sleeping through the night. We need to stop family bed with the oldest kids. So there were a lot of choices, I think, now that a lot of moms now who are doing holistic parenting, or a lot of parents, are a little more a la carte. But I think that for me, I've learned that we have to really look at what's working for us and what makes us feel good, and not take so much responsibility for everything. Because I know lots of moms who did very conventional parenting, and their kids, some of them, struggle with things, and some of them are great. And I've got 4 kids, and they've struggled with things, and they're great. And there's no recipe. I guess that's the point for me, is there's no one recipe.
Absolutely. And I think that's very much something that we've built into the whole philosophy of the Holistic Moms Network, is that, everybody's journey is individual, and you really need to choose the path that works for you, because not every path is for every person. And I
Right.
agree with you 100%. I mean, having had both my kids at home, I am happy to support anyone who wants a home birth, but I also completely understand every other option out there because
Yes.
your mindset and your environment and your own personal stress levels affect every single choice that you make. So it's not just so simple to say, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And it may not work. And I think what's so important is that self-talk that you mentioned. And I think that that undermines all of us stronger than anything else, because you're going to have people who will criticize. You're going to have people who will say, who does that? Or are you still doing that? And I nursed my older one until he was almost 5. And
Yeah.
the same thing, like, seriously, why are you still doing this? Like, there's something
I
wrong.
feel like becoming a parent somehow gives you this flashing neon sign that's invisible that says, please give me all your unsolicited advice because I'm begging you for it. Please tell me everything that you think I should be doing differently. And yes, absolutely touch my belly whenever you want to when I'm pregnant. Like, no. We have to create this shield almost and really dive deep and trust, learn to listen to our gut and also our emotions and our moods, because those can often be very revealing of what is really working for you and what isn't working for you, and being honest about that. And that can be very hard to do. Like if you're in a holistic moms community, I'm not saying this network, but I've had women, I've taught at conferences and I've taught a class, for example, on pregnancy or birth. I remember I was the keynote speaker at the Midwives Alliance of North America conference, and a mama came up to me. She was a mama, but becoming a midwife. And she came up to me crying in the audience after the talk from the audience. And she said that she had been asked to leave her online mommy group because she had an epidural and then ended up with a C-section. And they felt like, well, your value system isn't appropriate for this group. And I was just like, you're kidding. I mean, first of all, she went through something that she didn't anticipate or actually want. And then she has her own internal processing to do. And then the judgment. I'm like, the mommy wars thing has got to stop. And we're all just on the same side doing our best, I think.
Agreed, 100%. And it's not there's no right, wrong choice for everyone. It's your family and we don't need the judgment. 100%. I mean, it's time for people to let it go. I mean, we always used to joke, from the beginning of Holistic Moms that, we all had like one of our conversation starters is like, what are your non-holistic, virtues, if you will, and people would say, oh my gosh, I'm addicted to paper towels, or chocolate is my savior. And that's okay. And we have to allow that is okay for all of us. And we have to, get rid of that negative self-talk, because you will have so many things that happen in your life that you're not going to anticipate.
Yes.
And you're going to have to bend with what your ideal is versus, how things may, be thrown at you, and how you mesh those things together.
We've been really fortunate, and I'm like just beyond filled with gratitude. I mean, we didn't have any unforeseen pregnancy outcomes or like traumas or tragedies like that. Yet I have 4 grown kids and 2 grandkids, and they've gone through all kinds of gamut of things in their life. And I recently was telling a mama in my medical practice who's having a really just significant time breastfeeding her baby. And she had a quite easy time with her first baby, which is really interesting. This baby was just a different creature with different things going on altogether. And I was just saying, I've really come to define motherhood almost as the ability to pivot with what these people bring us as being their mothers. You can't necessarily anticipate or plan ahead. And it starts early, right? It starts with pregnancy, the thing that happens that maybe you find out about, or the birth, right? We were really fortunate that we wanted to have home births and we were able to. But then the person who it doesn't work out to have a home birth, and then they transport. And I think that when I ask moms this question often, like if something's going wrong, if you will, in any aspect of your pregnancy, your birth, your kids' health, whatever it is, the first question women tend to ask ourselves is, what am I doing wrong? What can I be doing different or better? And we take on so much, I think, guilt and self-blame also. And I'd love to just see us as moms just park that at the door, park it somewhere else, drop it down a big volcanic crater and be done with the self-judgment and the guilt. Because I think we are able to, one, enjoy the experience and the process a lot more because we have a lot more perspective. But I think we're actually able to see our kids more for who they are and what they really need instead of what we think is perfect. And then when it doesn't go according to that plan, because our kids have their own story, we get so hard on ourselves about it.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the journeys of the motherhood experience, is realizing that everything you do is not necessarily going to be what materializes in the end. Your children are unique in their own ways, and they're going to take paths that you may or may not have chosen. I mean, my older son definitely went through a holistic rebellion stage where anything holistic was like, oh, please, that's just, hokey and, whatever. And you just have to take that with a grain of salt. They're on their own journey. You provide this, safe space for them. You provide this ground for them. You give them, the room to become who they're going to become. And then you really have to sit back and let them fly and to crash. Sometimes you have to stand back and let your children fail at things so that you can see them grow.
Yeah. Well, and also there gets to be a point in all of their lives where they're not going to listen to they're not going to necessarily take our guidance and advice anyway. They swing back around to it, but there are all the years where they're doing the things that may be a little bit uncomfortable for us or a lot uncomfortable for us, whatever they're experimenting with or trying on, or they may be very different people than we birthed, and they're showing us who they are. But it's also during those very same years that they're not necessarily going to take our guidance, and we have to let them become their own people. And I think still give the guidance. That's the thing, still give the guidance, because they want, especially in those teen years, I feel like they only want us when they want us, but when they want us, they really want us. But they want to know, even if they're ignoring what we're telling them, they want to know that we're still there providing the strength and the rock and the guidance that they still say no to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think they need that comfort, that feeling of home, like your family is home, wherever that is, that's a safe space for you and you can come home to that. I think the whole point for us as mothers or parents in general is to allow ourselves not to have those negative self-talk moments,
Yeah.
and also to indulge in some self-care. And that is
Yes.
something essential and like so important at every stage. We think of early motherhood as, you're in the trenches, and self-care is so hard, especially if you're attachment parenting and breastfeeding and co-sleeping, and it's exhausting.
Yeah.
And something that, can drain you, and you need to be very conscious of that.
Yeah. And I think that, for me, having done it, I mean, if you look at every picture of my kids, they're either on my chest, they're on my back, they're next to me, they're breastfeeding. And the thing is, attachment parenting is really not how humans were meant to live, in the sense that in a more traditional culture, the baby would have been attached to lots of adults in the community. Lots of aunties and lots of sisters and lots of grannies would have been holding the baby. I mean, even in my early years, I apprenticed in a collective of African American midwives, which was an incredible opportunity for me. I was in the Deep South. I was a young mom, becoming a mom and a young mom myself. And it was just nothing for the midwife who was my mentor to have her baby with her at a birth on her back. And there were many times over the years where I just nursed I was nursing and I just nursed one of her babies while she was doing something in the baby. In fact, one of her next to youngest, when he was graduating from high school, they asked me to say something and I did. And I talked about, well, when you were little and I used to breastfeed you. And of course, everyone was just like, oh my God. And he turned red. But that's how it was. It wasn't just us alone in this nuclear isolated space contracted in and living our life for the baby. That's the other thing, is when you're an at-home mom and you're taking care of a tiny person, you become consumed by their needs and meeting their needs. And it's very hard to get any of our own needs met. I can remember with my first, my husband would come home from work and I would just remember handing the baby over and just being like, I haven't gone to the bathroom. I haven't showered. I'm like, he's like, why can't you do all that stuff with the baby? I'm like, I can't explain it. And then he would have those moments where he had that and he would be like, oh, I get it. But the thing is, in more traditional cultures, and I think if we call it attachment parenting, we're aspiring on some levels to reclaim these very innate, original ways of being with and raising our babies from the minute we're pregnant until they leave the nest. But that is not how parenting happened, right? In a traditional culture, babies thrown on back, babies thrown on chest, babies hanging from a hammock in a tree, and mom is actually going about her business. The baby is part of mom, not mom's life is now contracted to the sphere of meeting baby's needs. And that kind of parenting happens also in a community of people. So mom's out doing work, she's doing meaningful things. And while raising a baby is meaningful, of course, our minds need more than just that one little creature whose demands are like being met by our body, literally. And we need more social engagement. I believe we need more mental and cognitive stimulation. And when we get those things, I think parenting becomes easier. And I think it's very, very hard when your whole universe becomes just this little person. And it can be delicious. There are delicious parts of it. And if your baby is relatively an easier baby, and if your breastfeeding is going easily, all the more so. But if it's not, it can really be a deep setup for postpartum anxiety, postpartum depression, isolation, all the things that so many mamas go through. So I really want to encourage us, as we're talking about self-care, to sometimes, and I know this is going to sound so radical in a way for especially this community, but I'm going to say this tongue in cheek. Sometimes it's okay to just step away from the baby. And I think we tell ourselves this story, and I know the story because I lived the story. We tell ourselves this story of, I can't because I have to breastfeed. I can't because I have to do the attachment parenting. I can't because I can't sleep because I'm sleeping with the baby. All the while, we're becoming more and more and more exhausted and irritated. And I don't think that's better for you or baby. So I really encourage all of us to find ways, whether it's a high school student up the street who comes and babysits for an hour a day and you have fed the baby. I didn't use any bottles. I was very, very organic, and everything was cloth diapers, no bottles, no passies. And I mean, for me, it all went pretty smoothly, but I know lots of moms that didn't go smoothly for, and being able to give the baby the pacifier so the baby's not screaming in the car seat so that you can get to play group and have other companionship, is all those things I feel like we have to expand and give ourselves permission to do self-care, even if that's a shower, even if it's like going to the bathroom by yourself, if it's putting baby down to go feed yourself. I can remember like all the times I didn't eat because I didn't realize my first, like, I could put the baby down and go eat, and there I am like with low blood sugar, you know what I mean? All those things. We have to do those things, even if you have to push yourself to like put the baby down and go do it. It's so important.
It absolutely is. And it's, for moms who are feeling really overwhelmed, it's important to even take those little tiny things and celebrate those moments of self-care. It doesn't have to be, and it doesn't have to be like, I have to sit in a bubble bath with a glass of wine.
No.
That is, self-care can be something super easy. Like if it's that pile of dishes that are just really annoying you, getting those done and out of the way so you can walk by a nice clean sink and smile, that's self-care too. I mean, it
It
really
is.
is. I mean, whatever it is that it takes for you. And if it's really, really hard to find those moments, because we don't have that community that we all wish, we still existed.
Yeah.
You pass your baby off to someone else for a little while. And a lot of us are living without nuclear
Well,
family.
and with COVID, it just made it so much harder. I mean, oh, it was just so hard. Really, people just, you're it.
Yeah, COVID was
Yeah.
intense for
Yeah.
lockdown for sure.
No, it can be 10 minutes of meditation. It can be nursing the baby and reading 15 minutes of that trashy novel that you're wanting to read. Or it can be nursing the baby and sitting outside somewhere, and listening to some good music. It can be all those things.
Absolutely. And I like to think that that's a little bit of a silver lining that we had with COVID is that we, with the restrictions that we had and with the lockdowns that we had, there were moments where we learned to appreciate those little things, like being able to sit outside on a nice sunny day and being like, okay, this is a nice moment, or, to work in the garden, for a little while. And
Yeah.
then as your kids get older, bringing them into that fold, letting them help you a little bit as needed, or if not, I mean, if you need your private time,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges is what are practical things that we can work into our daily lives that are self-care.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me as a young mom, and with little kids, um, really believing that I had the right to carve out a half hour for myself once a day, whether that was to, and especially as the kids got older, if I had my 9-year-old could watch the baby and the 3-year-old and the 6-year-old for 20 minutes while I grabbed a shower right in the next room, like those little things that you can do. For me, just starting the day, eating well and staying hydrated, and 5 minutes even of just deep breathing and calming thinking and centering back into myself. I think for me, the experience of motherhood was pouring so much out of myself that any little minute that I could regather myself. So for me, it was journaling while I was nursing sometimes, or in that few minutes the baby was napping. Definitely gardening, continuing to do the things that I love to do. I wore my babies all the time. So whether that was cooking a really nice meal with a baby on a back, a baby eventually on a hip, of course, carefully away from a hot stove and all those things. But um, I loved doing handcrafts and gardening. So continuing to do those while the kids were really small, with a baby on the back, for example, or when a baby was sleeping. Um, and then napping if I needed to when a baby was sleeping. Napping is self care. It may feel like it's not, because what you really want to do is all the things that you can't do while the baby's awake. But napping is self care. Um, though I think those were the things. I think for me, the biggest self care, especially as my kids got to be toddlers, was just even a couple of hours to have dinner with a girlfriend or take a walk with I remember one time my best girlfriend, she had, her first baby was a year older than mine, and her second baby was the same age as mine. And I remember, we were pregnant with the second ones, and we just wanted some quiet time. It was a rainy afternoon, and we just put the toddlers in the car seat and we drove until they fell asleep, and we parked and we talked for whatever it was, the hour and a half that they were lulled by the rain. Whatever it takes to get those sacred moments. And I think talking to other women about what you're really going through is a form of self-care. And being really honest about how it's going. When it's going great, wonderful, make sure you're listening to the other person. But dishing, I mean, we all have no problem dishing about our boyfriends and our partners and our husbands and our wives and girlfriends, but I think we feel we can't tell the truth about our experiences of motherhood sometimes. And I think doing that, like, it kind of like pushes aside this veil where it makes you feel normal again. Like, I'm not the only one going through this. And that is major self-care.
Absolutely. I mean, conversation and connecting with other people, especially other moms, it just revitalizes you. You can walk away from, a meeting with a girlfriend, a holistic moms meeting, a getting together with a sibling and having a conversation and feel like I needed that so
Yeah.
badly. And I didn't realize how much I needed it until after the fact. And it's also okay to say, you're not an imperfect parent. if you don't want to spend all your time with your kids.
Yeah.
Like, it's okay to say, I love my child, but I need to get the heck away from them right now. Like, I need that space. I need that quiet. I need not to be needed. And I
Yes.
think that is
Like
really
getting touched out, when you just feel touched out, or, you're hearing that, if I hear mom one more time. And again, I think that's part of being really connected to what is going on in our bodies and our emotions, and using that as information. And if you're feeling exhausted and irritable, you're not a bad mom. That is par for the course to some extent for all mothers. At some point, it is par for the course for all of us. But not just ignoring it and saying, oh, I'm a mom, but actually doing something about it. Okay, I'm irritable. I'm exhausted. What do I need right now? And that is such an important and critical piece of being a mother. Sometimes in my medical practice, so I have so many women who are moms who are burnt out at various stages of raising children, overwhelmed, exhausted, all the things. And they'll say, but I can't because I've got the kids. And I always say, it's funny, sometimes for me in my medical practice, to get women to do something for themselves, I still have to frame it as beneficial for the children. And so I'll say, well, so if you're a mom and you're exhausted and your kids are like 5 and 7 and 9, and I get it that you homeschool, and I get it that you do the family bed, been there, done that, I understand it. But you're telling me you're totally exhausted, you're burnt out, maybe you have a thyroid problem or an adrenal problem or sugar cravings or whatever it is, irritability, anxiety, depression, and you can't get an hour to yourself. And I'll then say, so what are we modeling for our daughters and our sons that being a mother means? Because in a sense, we are modeling that we have to give up our entire well-being to do this. And that's not what I want to teach my daughters about being a mom. It's not what I want to teach my son about being a parent or being a partner to a mom. And of course, there's so much gender fluidity. We don't actually know what role any of our children is going to have when they grow up. So I also think about that, like, what am I modeling right now for my child? And what do I want to model right now for my child? And taking space is a really healthy thing to model for our children. Taking a walk when we feel irritated, even if we take like all the things, like think about that as you're parenting. What am I modeling right now? And is this what I want to model? And often that is enough to get you to self-reflect on, is this good for me right at this minute? Or what do I need right at this minute? If my daughter or my son were me right now, what would I suggest that they do right now? And I think that's really important. For me, one of the big pivots was actually kind of hilarious. I didn't have a television. My earliest kids were born really before the days of the home computer, because my oldest is 37. So my youngest is 28. So I was midwifing. We didn't have a TV, and I was pregnant with my fourth baby. And I had a midwifery client, and she was pregnant with her fourth baby. And so we were comparing how it's going. And I said, the one thing is I could really use a nap every afternoon. Like, I could just use a nap. And she said, she's so funny. She said, in this heavy Southern accent, Georgia accent, now, Aviva, sometimes in life, you got to make a decision, honey. You either get a television or kill a kid. And it was so funny. But she was so, I got a TV. I got a TV, and we got a VCR, and the kids watch videos. Like, it was a concession. And I know a lot of parents struggle with screen time. I'm very much about having good parameters on screen time, but timing your kids' screen time so that you can meet your needs while your kids are getting, so don't just indiscriminately do screen time. Save the screen time for mommy time. Mommy time is screen time. Screen time. Just little things like that can make a huge difference too.
I'd love to jump in real quick. We have about, a few minutes left. And this might be I don't know, tough one to narrow down, but do you feel like there's something that consistently runs through kind of the motherhood journey that we should strive to do either for our physical or mental health kind of throughout those stages of motherhood that will, start when we're just having babies and help us through those many years of motherhood?
Yeah. So I'm going to answer that with a two-part answer. One is the word strive is part of what I would encourage us to maybe not do and spend more time being and less time striving. Like really just spend more time being present in the moment, thinking about how you want to raise your kids, but not being on the strive, perfectionism, how I should do it. And then the second piece comes back to what Nancy said earlier about self-talk. Very early on, start to learn to identify your negative self-talk and be as gentle and loving and compassionate to yourself. So switch that self-talk so that you're reprogramming the negative self-talk to this, as soon as you start to hear it, a gentle, loving, compassionate voice comes in and treats you the way you would talk to your best friend if she were on the mom journey at any point right now. So really learn to identify and reframe that. I think that is probably the biggest gift you can give yourself, is that gentle self-talk and self-compassion and self-love.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that that's dead on what we really need to do, because you're going to have those moments, not just in the early years of parenting, but as your children get older and they start to challenge you more with different things. And it's equally exhausting, even later on, because your children will lean into you and expect you to, be there for them, and being able to hear your own voice. Is this my fault? Did I create this problem? Is this something I did wrong in my parenting that my child is now struggling with this choice?
Was it that one glass of wine I had before I was pregnant, knew I was pregnant, that my child is now being evaluated for something in school, or that my child is, and the thing is, our kids are living in a context that is so unprecedented. The things that my grandchild has to be aware of when he goes off, my grandchildren, when they go off to school, the things that their parents have to be aware of in terms of just safety, complexity of conversations. It's a lot. And it's very easy to blame ourselves or judge ourselves, but there's so much more going on in the world that is also shaping our children. And if we're apologizing or blaming or judging, then we're not really being what they need us to be, which is parents. And I think parenting is very different than friending our children. And I am a friend to my children, and my children are grown, and I have friend-like relationships. But even within that, I still retain the mom boundary, because they, even at 28 to 37, they still want me to be mom. And so if you're trying too hard to be a friend to your child, if you're creating such a bubble where you're approaching attachment parenting as if the world is not a safe place and you have to protect your child from it, that also creates tensions. So how can we expand into just being wonderful guides and listeners and supporters and cheerleaders, but also, as you said, let them stumble sometimes and pick themselves back up?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's very hard to do as a parent, especially when in your mind know what that outcome is going to be. You're like, I know if they go that direction, it's not going to make the best, outcome for them. But you have to be able to hold your tongue. Sometimes you can share your advice, you can share your suggestions, but sometimes
you know what? Sometimes those things turn out. My son went to medical school, and in his first semester, he fell down a flight of stairs. It was just a random accident at twilight on some unstable slate at a pied-à-terre. And he went from fully sighted in medical school to functionally blind within 3 months. And he did medical school auditory for 2 more years. And then, long story short, his vision came back, but he really didn't like the way the medical education system treated him as a person with a disability. And he went into public health. And so he left medical school. I was a physician. He left medical school, 2 years of medical debt because they weren't going to pay that back. Went through this closed head injury, was very traumatic for our family and, of course, for him. Ultimately regained his sight, but then got into public health and ended up creating an organization that not only has a multi-billion-dollar valuation, but serves hundreds of thousands of people who are in marginalized and disenfranchised settings around the Eastern United States. So when he told me he was leaving medical school as a mom, I mean, closed head injury aside, that was terrifying. And then when he told me he was leaving medical school as a mom, I was like, ugh, all that homeschooling, all that call out the window, and I wanted to talk him out of it. And I had to step back and trust. And what he created was something far more than anything he would have learned in medical school on every level. So I know it's just like a huge lesson for me. The other thing that was a huge lesson for me, and this is so wild, but when he fell down those stairs, he was 21 years old. He was carrying a bicycle and some groceries and went to answer a cell phone, and it was twilight, and then he stumbled and had this major concussion. Do you all know what my first thought was? A 21-year-old kid living in another state, had already gone to college, already in medical school. And my first thought was, I wish I had been, like, I actually had this image of like, I should have been there holding his hand. Like somehow that would prevent him from falling. It was ridiculous, but it was really truly my instinctual mom thought. But it was really interesting too, because at that moment, it was a pivotal shift for me as a mother. And I realized I could have a son who's blind. And it was just this moment of like, anything can happen. And I want my children to live life unafraid and as fully as possible in the time that we all have, rather than being as, I think, protective as some of my parenting style had been. And that was a huge life lesson for me of like letting go. And now when they take a risk on a job or a relationship or a travel opportunity, I feel very differently about it. I'm like, good, go, like, live it. And that, I think, is really probably one of the most important life lessons for me that I've had as a mother, is releasing a little bit, letting go a little more, trusting the babysitter or the grandparent or the what you need to do, trusting if you want to go back to school and get an education or take a job, or being at home isn't right for you even, or your kid wants to do that adventure. I think that's really the biggest way to live, and the biggest way to be a parent is to let them have that.
Wow. Thank you. That's a lovely way to kind of wrap up. I think
Welcome.
you are two women that are extremely inspirational, and you've both been through this motherhood journey and have grown children. Nancy still has a teenager as well, but to hear your words of wisdom is very inspiring, and I think gives each of us something to leave with and remind us to be more gentle on ourselves and keep that reminder every day. Like, wake up saying that each and every day. So.
And it never ends, right? I mean, it doesn't end. Your kids are still your kids when they're 37, I promise. I still worry about stuff. I mean, it never ends. We still have to continually be gentle on ourselves. That part never ends.
Yeah. Well, thank you both. I appreciate you. Thank you to everyone that joined us as well. And who knows, maybe we'll do it again soon.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Aviva.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.